Hey, everyone, and welcome to the Mark Prater podcast, where our aim is to connect our global family of Sovereign Grace churches with our executive director. Mark, you are back from another leadership team retreat, this time, I believe, in Los Angeles, where you gathered with the team. And you were sharing with me before we started recording about how valuable that you think it is that you guys actually gathered together physically in one place, apart from doing monthly Zoom calls and that kind of thing, that there's great value in that. Talk to us about that.
Mhm. Yeah, it is a value. I think it's even a conviction for us as a leadership team because we love serving our family of churches. And there's much that we get done over Zoom meetings, but actually
Sure.
being together face to face for a few days accomplishes a number of things. First of all, we're able to build relationally, not just in terms of deepening our friendships, but it allows the team to function as a team. We value team ministry in Sovereign Grace. Each of our churches has teams or are building teams because we share that value, and that really gets at plurality. We want to lead together as a team. We want to lead Sovereign Grace together, and that's our heart. It's also a BCO a mention that the leadership team will function as a plurality. So it's not only a conviction we have, it's an attempt to honor our BCO. So just being together for a few days does help us to accomplish that and to build relationally. It also just gives us a chance to have, as I've mentioned before, strategic conversations and to do strategic planning that is a little bit more difficult to do over Zoom, not only because of the limitations of technology, but because Zoom meetings that go longer than an hour or hour and a half begin to lose their effectiveness. So
Zoom
this
fatigue.
just yes, Zoom fatigue. So this just allows us to linger in certain conversations. I always go in with an agenda. I always go in with a bigger agenda than I know we're going to get through because when we linger in conversations, the Spirit of God helps us and we go down paths that we didn't plan. And sometimes those can be our most fruitful decisions in serving our churches. I think that's become even more important to us as a team because we are realizing that the family of churches that we serve is a little bit more diffuse and diverse. And here's what I mean by that. As a pastor of a Sovereign Grace church, a pastor knows his flock and he knows the flock, he knows the context within his church exists. And so that can help you pastor people. It can help you to know how to preach to your people. That gets a little bit more complicated when you've got a family of churches that exist in different nations, in different cultures. So we are a more diffuse and diverse family of churches. And knowing who we are has a little bit more complexity than just knowing a local congregation. So we want to make sure we know who Sovereign Grace is, and we want it to be able to lead us in a certain direction based on that. So those are just some of the reasons that we think it's important to gather physically together 3 times a year. This one was in Los Angeles, by the way, because Dave Taylor did join us from Sydney, and that's just one leg of a flight for him rather than flying deeper into the States. So it does help serve him. And a decision, I can't remember if I mentioned this on a podcast or not, that we decided as a leadership team is that all leadership team members will attend one retreat a year, and the other two, I'll decide who from the leadership team comes. And so this was a smaller group of men from the leadership team. It was Dave Taylor, Jeff Purswell, John Payne, Jared Mellinger, and myself. Even though the other guys I'll bring them up to speed and we'll send out notes and decisions that they can read, and then I'll follow up with them verbally. So we're just so grateful. I'm so grateful for this team and that I get to serve with them. Being with them again this week made me even more grateful to God for them.
Wonderful. Yeah, it reminds me of the Apostle Paul. Of course, didn't have Zoom. He sent letters, but how he
He
would
did.
communicate in his letters to those whom he sought to serve, those he loved, that he wished he could be there in person. So
Mm.
that's wonderful that you guys were able to do that. So what was it like? What did you go over? What's an update coming out of the leadership team retreat about what you guys talked about?
Yeah, we talked about a lot. I felt like we got a lot done. So I'm just going to pull out some highlights. This is a partial list of just things that we talked about. we talked about how leading Sovereign Grace has become has really is becoming more of a wonderful complexity, and it's kind of what I mentioned before. We are diffuse and we're diverse. For example, what I mean by that is that there are cultural issues in the States that really are important and that we need to help our pastors, equip our pastors to lead through. That could be things like gender ideology or sexual orientation, or how does politics impact the church? Those kind of things. Those may not be issues that other Sovereign Grace churches face in other nations, or they may be, but they're of lesser degree. One comparison: churches in West Africa and East Africa, for example, those in Liberia and Ethiopia, they are facing a more heightened prosperity gospel. That's the big issue, or one of the biggest issues that they face. And so, how do we equip them with addressing that when it's not quite to the same degree an issue here in the States? That's just one example. So we had a wonderful conversation where we were getting down different issues that we need to equip our pastors to face, and it's a diverse list. And so then we talked about how do we take that and lead effectively. Obviously, the good news is that the Word of God speaks into all of those situations.
Right.
So it does heighten our need and our commitment to provide biblically based theological leadership. And we just talked about ways to do that. So that was a wonderful conversation. We had a conversation that I entitled Tone and Truth. Part of what we were talking about there is, what should our tone be in communicating truth, and what should our tone be in standing for truth? Because that's becoming, I think, more necessary that we stand for truth. And I sent the leadership team an article that Andy Naselli wrote before the retreat, which we did discuss a bit. That article is entitled "Winsomeness Can Be a Virtue or a Vice." And it's a wonderful article. You could Google it and read it yourself if you'd like to. Obviously, he's for winsomeness. We want our tone to be godly and gracious and to be Christ-like, because that's a reflection of what we believe about the gospel. But it shouldn't be so winsome that we water down our ability to stand for truth. Because in this cultural moment, I think even in this evangelical moment, we've got to be very clear and at times strong in defending the truth. And so I illustrated that by just pulling from an introduction that Kevin DeYoung recently wrote for that 100th anniversary edition of Machen's Christianity and Liberalism. And if you haven't read Christianity and Liberalism by J. Gresham Machen, please do. I would get the 100th anniversary copy that just came out a few months ago. If you've already read that book and don't have the 100th anniversary copy, I think it's worth the price just for Kevin DeYoung's introduction in Machen's book, because he really just pulls out why standing for truth is so important and what Machen did. If you don't know the history, that Machen's book didn't start as a book. It began as an address that he gave to a presbytery in the Philadelphia area. And what he was addressing in that speech was that there was a move at that time to unite 18 different denominations as sort of one unified denomination. And Machen was against it because their creed was theologically ambiguous and really didn't represent Presbyterianism in specifically. So he gave an address against what was known as the Philadelphia Plan. B.B. Warfield, a contemporary, joined him in that opposition. His denomination at the time, the PCUSA, Machen's denomination, was embracing this plan. And so he was speaking against it, making a strong stand against it. And it was so well received that he was encouraged. He gave the address in 1921. And that was so well received that he was encouraged to turn that into a book, which was published in 1923. So this is the 100th anniversary. And DeYoung pulls out, sort of reviews the book and then pulls out 7 lessons that are important for us. And you should read those 7 lessons. I walked the leadership team through them. One of those being, it's important that we make sure we clearly communicate what truth is, but it's also important that we clearly communicate what is false and what is false doctrine. And we have to do both of those things. So there is a place right now for us to stand for truth and to be clear on what's true and what's false. And where possible, do that in a winsome way, but don't allow winsomeness to trump truth. We've got to be clear and standing for truth. So we had a great conversation around that, which was really, really helpful. A part of the reason we were having that conversation is another topic that we discussed is something I think maybe a lot of pastors are at least watching and asking the question, what is really happening in evangelicalism right now? So what is the current what is this current evangelical moment or current cultural moment, if you can marry those two things together? So is it one of, as you watch evangelicalism splinter a bit, is it one of just sad self-righteous separation? Or is it one where there's theological erosion? And if that's the case, which we believe it is a bit as a leadership team, we have to guard our churches against theological erosion. And of course, we don't know what God is doing right now in this evangelical moment. We don't know where the dust is going to settle and what evangelicalism will look like. But what we do see is a drift theologically, certainly some theological erosion, which heightens the need for us as a leadership team, and I think for us as pastors in any Sovereign Grace church, to provide, again, biblically sound, theologically informed leadership. So we had a great conversation about that. We've asked Jeff to sort of capture our thoughts and write it, and we may even find a way to get that into our pastor's hands. We talked about that. Jared Mellinger gave a wonderful publishing update for the journals that we have planned to be published in the next year or two, and then a number of other publishing projects we're working on that will be self-published, that are going to be released fairly soon. One of them on joyful generosity that was written by 3 or 4 Sovereign Grace pastors. It's about 10,000 words. It was written so that members can interact with it and just have a biblical, a theological basis for generosity and giving first and foremost to their local church. We've taken, Jared's taken Jeff's message on zeal that he passed at the pastors conference from Romans last year, put that into a book form, and that will be published. And so we're going to begin to self-publish publications or books, mostly drawn from resources we already have, put the Sovereign Grace logo on them so that there's a connection between, oh, that's a Sovereign Grace resource. I think I may want to read that. And we hope that it serves both the members of our churches and the pastors of our churches as well. And then we talked about, I've mentioned this before in a previous podcast, we plan to publish theo-pastoral resources, kind of like our old Perspective series. Some of pastors listening to this or reading this podcast would remember that name. And we may even use that same name. There's a draft right now written of elder-led, elder-governed churches. What do we believe about that why do we think that theologically? Why is that a value? I know Jeff is thinking about a theopastoral resource in the area of pneumatology, which I think would really serve our churches. Yeah. So just some things that we're exciting to talk about and that we have planned. And just a reminder on the journal, that's written primarily for our members, but I'm talking to pastors like yourself, Ben, that are using it to actually reinforce the leadership they're bringing in their local church. So you were telling me right before this podcast that you're in just a few weeks going to start a series on shaping virtues, and you plan to use that general. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we're having our community groups. Actually, some of them already started doing this, but we're going to have each community group use the journal as we go through the series. It'll take longer because they meet twice a month, so they can't interact about every sermon in real time, but they're going to be using the journal, the article for each virtue and application questions as just a shared resource to get the conversation and application going in community groups. So we're seeking, we did just plant a church, sent out over 100 people, got a lot of new people. So we're endeavoring to acclimate them and for them to understand and be clear about what it is that we're after when it comes to discipleship and a culture of grace at Living Hope. So the journal's serving us big time in that way.
Mm. That's good leadership on your part. Thanks for using it. And a reminder to our guys, we publish those resources because we hope some of them will be tools that you can use as pastors to serve your churches.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thanks for the update. And thank you to each member of the leadership team. Thank you for your sacrifice, leaving home, heading to Los Angeles to serve our family of churches. And thanks for the update, Mark. So we'll see you here, Lord willing, next week. Bye for now.
Thank you for watching. If you have questions or comments, Mark would love to hear from you. For more videos like this, hit subscribe on YouTube or by email at markkprater.com.